The wagon wheel dropped into a rut of frozen mud, jolting Clara so hard her teeth clicked together. She tasted grit and the metallic tang of old fear. She had been riding in the back of the freight wagon for 3 weeks, hidden under a canvas tarp that smelled of cured tobacco and mold. Now, the wagon had stopped. "We're here," the driver, a man named Jed, called out. He did not care if she heard. He had been paid $10 in Missouri to let her hide among the cargo, and his obligation was finished. "Get on out, girl. This is Dry Creek Crossing." Clara moved her limbs slowly. They were stiff, aching from the cold and the cramped space. She pushed aside the heavy canvas, the light of a late autumn afternoon, thin and yellow, sliced at her eyes. She squinted, seeing only the dark shapes of a few low buildings huddled against a wide, gray sky. The air was sharp. It did not smell like Missouri. It smelled of pine, wood smoke, and a cold so deep it seemed to come from the bones of the earth. She slid over the wagon's tailgate. Her bare feet met the ground. The mud was not just wet. It was a half-frozen slurry that sucked at her skin, stealing what little warmth she had left. She had lost her shoes 100 miles back, running from a camp in the night. Her dress, a faded calico, was torn at the hem and stained with travel. Her hair, once her only vanity, was a matted tangle of brown knots. She was 19 years old, and she looked like a starved ghost. Jed tossed her small, pathetic bundle onto the ground. "That's it, Dry Creek. Ain't much, but it's the last stop before the high passes close." He did not wait for a reply. Turning to unhitch his team, Clara stood by the wagon, trembling. Shame was a heat that burned in her chest, a strange contrast to the ice in her toes. People were watching. From the long, low-slung porch of the general store, 2 men in worn coats observed her. Their eyes were flat, appraising. A woman in a dark apron, the store owner's wife. Clara would learn. Stepped out, wiping her hands. Her gaze swept over Clara, pausing on her bare, muddy feet. The woman's lips thinned into a line of profound disapproval. This was what she had fled her stepfather for. This was what she had endured weeks of hunger and terror to find. Another set of eyes, judging her, finding her wanting. The man she was supposed to marry in Missouri had been wealthy, a rancher with soft hands and a wet mouth. Her stepfather had called it a fine match. Clara had called it a cage. She had seen the way he looked at her, the way he touched the small of her back. It was the look of a man pricing a livestock. So she had run, taking nothing but the dress she wore and the few coins she had sewn into its hem. Coins that were long since spent. Now, she was a burden. A piece of driftwood washed up at a place that had no room for extra mouths, especially not useless ones. The woman in the apron, Mrs. Hatcher, finally spoke. Her voice was as sharp as the wind. "Well, you planning to take root out there, girl?" Clara flinched. She picked up her bundle and forced her frozen feet to move. Each step in the mud was a fresh humiliation. She walked toward the porch, her head bowed. "Wagon driver said you was coming," Mrs. Hatcher said. She was a thick-bodied woman with hands raw from lye soap. "Said you was looking for work. What can you do?" Clara's throat closed. The truth was a stone in her belly. She had been raised to be an ornament. Her mother, before she died, had insisted on piano lessons and watercolor, on reading poetry. She had not been taught to cook, to sew, to clean, or to do any of the things that mattered in a world like this. I can read," Clara whispered. "Mrs." Hatcher let out a short, harsh laugh. "Read. Well, that'll keep you warm when the snows come. Can you cook for a dozen hungry men?" "No, ma'am." "Mend a shirt so it'll hold?" Clara shook her head, the shame burning hotter. "No." "Know how to milk a cow? Salt a hog? Knead bread?" "No, ma'am." Mrs. Hatcher's eyes were filled with a weary, practical scorn. "Then what good are you?" Clara had no answer. She had been asking herself the same question for weeks. She felt the eyes of the men on the porch, and the worse, colder stare of the store owner's wife. She was on the verge of collapsing. The hunger, the cold, and the shame were a tide pulling her under. "Martha," a man's voice called from inside. "Don't waste time. Bring her in. She's shivering." "Mrs." Hatcher grunted, but she held the door open. "Inside. Don't you dare drip on my clean floor." The inside of the store was warm. A large pot-bellied stove radiated a heat that made Clara's skin prickle. The air smelled of coffee, cured tobacco, new denim, and salt. It was overwhelming. She huddled near the stove, afraid to touch anything, afraid to even exist. Mr. Hatcher, a thin man with a kind face shadowed by worry, gave her a tin cup of weak, hot coffee. She drank it so fast she burned her tongue. "She's a gentlewoman. Martha," Mr. Hatcher said quietly to his wife, as if Clara could not hear. "You can see it. She's just fallen on hard times." "She's fallen on our doorstep, is what?" Martha Hatcher snapped. "And winter's coming. We can't feed a girl who can't earn her keep. She's useless." Clara squeezed her eyes shut. The word was a nail in her coffin. Useless. It was what her stepfather had called her when she refused the rancher. It was what she had proven to be, every step of the way from Missouri. She stayed by the stove for hours, a silent, wretched thing. The locals came and went, trading, talking, and every one of them cast a glance her way. The women were the worst. Their eyes lingered on her torn dress, her matted hair, her bare feet, which Mrs. Hatcher had insisted she wash in a bucket of cold water by the door. Their faces were hard, closed. They saw her as a threat, or a fool, or both. She was an unmarried woman, alone, with no skills, in the Montana Territory. In 1878, this was not just a social failing. It was a sin against survival. As the afternoon light began to fail, the store's door opened, and the air changed. A gust of frigid wind swept in, carrying the scent of pine and frozen earth. The few men lingering by the stove stopped their talk. "Mr." Hatcher looked up from his ledger, his expression tightening. The man who stood in the doorway seemed to block out the light. He was big, not just tall, but wide, with shoulders that strained the seams of his heavy buffalo hide coat. He was, Clara thought, the largest man she had ever seen. He did not walk. He moved, like a cat, silent and deliberate. He pulled off his fur hat, revealing a tangle of dark hair. A long, puckered scar ran from his left temple down his cheek, ending near the corner of his mouth. It pulled his eye just slightly, giving him a look of permanent, unsettling intensity. He carried a heavy bale wrapped in canvas and tied with rawhide. He dropped it on the floor with a heavy, final thud. "Boone." "Mr." Hatcher said, his voice a little too hearty. "Good to see you. We weren't expecting you for another few weeks." The big man, Boone, did not answer. He unslung a long rifle from his back and leaned it carefully against the counter. He moved to the counter and pushed back his coat, revealing a belt with a holstered revolver and a massive skinning knife. He was, Clara realized, terrifying. He was not a townsman. He was something else. He was the wilderness itself, given form. Elias Boone was a name spoken in whispers at Dry Creek. He was a mountain man, a trapper who lived so deep in the Beartooth Range that most folk only saw him twice a year. When he came to trade his pelts, he was a legend. They said he had killed 3 men in a fight over a mining claim. They said he'd wrestled a grizzly. They said he was half mad from solitude. He began his trade in silence. He unrolled his bale, and the counter was suddenly covered in the richest, thickest furs Clara had ever seen. Beaver, fox, mink, and ermine, all perfectly cured. Mrs. Hatcher, for all her scorn, looked at the pelts with greedy eyes. Elias Boone did not speak. He pointed. He pointed to the sacks of flour, to the large tins of coffee, to the block of salt, to the boxes of .44 caliber cartridges. Mr. Hatcher weighed and measured, his hands moving quickly. "That's a fine load. Boone, a fine load. You'll have a good credit this winter." Boone nodded once. His eyes, the color of slate, swept the room. They passed over the men at the stove, over Mrs. Hatcher, and then they landed on Clara. He just looked. He did not leer, like the rancher in Missouri. He did not appraise, like the men on the porch. He simply watched. His gaze was heavy, like a physical weight. Clara felt it on her skin, on her matted hair, on her bare feet. She looked down, her heart hammering, her cheeks burning with a new, deeper shame. She felt exposed, seen in a way she had never been, after a moment that stretched into an eternity. His gaze moved on. He finished his trade, loaded his supplies into canvas sacks, and turned to leave. He slung the first sack over his shoulder. He paused at the door. "You got whiskey?" he said. His voice was a revelation. It was not a grunt, but a deep, rough baritone, like rocks grinding together. "Always, Boone." "Mister," Hatcher said, reaching for a bottle. "Leave it." He tossed a small, silver coin onto the counter. "For the girl. Get her some shoes." Then he was gone. The door closed, and the silence he left behind was louder than his presence. "Mrs." Hatcher snatched the coin. "Well, the devil himself takes pity." She looked at Clara. You're more trouble than you're worth. I swear." Clara didn't know what to feel. The man had terrified her, but he had also seen her. He had seen her bare feet, and, unlike the others, he had done something. She hid herself behind a stack of barrels as the last of the light faded. She was exhausted, but she could not sleep. She was in a stranger's store, in a strange land, with no future and a past that haunted her. She pulled her knees to her chest, buried her face, and finally, after weeks of holding it in, she began to cry. She cried silently, her shoulders shaking. She cried for her lost home, for her dead mother, for the life she was supposed to have. She cried because she was useless, because she was cold, and because she was so hungry. She was so lost in her misery that she did not hear the store's door open again. She did not know he was there until his shadow fell over her. Clara gasped, stifling a scream. Elias Boone stood over her. He had come back. He held no supplies, no rifle. He just stood, a mountain of a man, watching her cry behind the general store. She froze, terrified. This was it. This was the moment she had been fleeing. A large, strange man had found her alone in the dark. He watched her for a full minute. He did not move, did not speak. His face was unreadable in the dusk. Clara's breath hitched, caught in her throat. Then he grunted. It was a low sound, of disapproval or maybe just acknowledgement. He turned on his heel and walked away from her, back into the store. Clara let out her breath in a ragged sob. She was trembling so hard her teeth chattered. He had seen her at her lowest, a pathetic wretch crying behind the barrels. The humiliation was complete. She waited, hidden, for another hour. The store closed. Mr. Hatcher told her she could sleep on a pile of blankets by the stove, but that she'd have to be gone in the morning. He couldn't afford to keep her. Clara nodded, her spirit broken. Gone where? She could walk out into the snow and lie down. It would be an easy death, a quiet one. She was huddled by the dying embers of the stove. The store, dark and quiet. When the door opened again, Mr. Hatcher, in his nightshirt, appeared from the back room, holding a lamp. "Boone, what is it now? We're closed." Elias Boone stood there, the cold wind whipping around him. He had his hat on again. "I came about the girl," he said. His voice was low, but it filled the dark store. Clara, from her pile of blankets, went rigid. "What about her?" Hatcher said, his voice wary. She's not for sale. Boone, she's a runaway. I think not a, well, you know, I know what she is," Boone said. "She's cold, and she's hungry." "We all are. Boone, winter's coming." There was a long silence. Elias stepped inside and shut the door. He walked to the counter. "What's her story?" "Don't know it," Hatcher said, rubbing his thin arms. "Showed up on the freight wagon. No money, no shoes. Useless. My Martha tried her. Can't cook, can't sew. She's maybe touched in the head. Frightened of her own shadow. He lowered his voice. Honestly, Boone, she won't survive the winter. Not here. She's not built for it. She's soft. Boone stared into the dark. Clara could see his profile against the faint light from Hatcher's lamp, the scarred, harsh line of his cheek. She got a name? Clara. He was silent for another long moment. Clara held her breath. She could feel his gaze on her, even in the darkness. Then he spoke, and the words he said made no sense. I'll take her, Hatcher sputtered. Take her? What do you mean, take her? Boone, I told you, she's not. I'll marry her. The store was so quiet, Clara could hear the snow beginning to hiss against the windows. Marry her? Hatcher's voice was a squeak. You're mad. You don't know her. She's useless. I got a cabin, Elias Boone said, his voice flat, as if stating a simple fact. It's a big cabin. I need a partner, someone to keep the hearth, someone to be there. He turned his head, and his eyes found Clara in the shadows. She felt pinned by his gaze. I need a wife, he said, his voice dropping. She's got hands, don't she? She can't do nothing with them, Hatcher protested. She can learn, Boone said. He was not talking to Hatcher anymore. He was talking to her. Clara felt a strange, terrifying balloon of hope swell in her chest. It was a feeling so foreign she almost choked on it. He was offering her, what, a new cage or a chance? She stood up from the blankets. Her legs were shaking. She stepped into the lamplight. Both men looked at her. Sir, she said, and her voice was a dry rasp. She had to clear her throat and try again. Sir, Mr. Boone. He just watched her. Mr. Hatcher is right. The words tore at her, but they had to be said. She would not be a lie, not again. I can't cook, I can't sew, I burn water, I am useless. I am everything they say. She was half-starved, standing in a dark store, confessing her worthlessness to a giant, scarred mountain man. It was the most honest and the most frightening moment of her life. Elias Boone looked at her for a long time. He looked at her matted hair, her torn dress, and her frightened eyes. He saw the desperation. He saw the flicker of fight that had made her speak the truth. He nodded once, a short, sharp motion. I can cook my own food, he said. I can skin my own hides. He took a step toward her. Clara held her ground, though every instinct screamed at her to run. I need a wife, he said. His voice softer now, though still rough. Not a servant. He was offering her survival. It was a trade. Her presence, her hands, for his protection, for a roof, for food. You come with me, he said. It was not a question. We'll see the preacher in the spring. When the pass opens, God and the mountain will be our witness till then. Clara looked at Mr. Hatcher, who was watching with wide, stunned eyes. She looked at the dying embers in the stove. She thought of the snow outside and the certainty of death. She turned back to Elias Boone. Yes, she whispered. I'll come. Hatcher found his voice. Clara, child, you don't have to. This is madness. It's survival, Clara said, her voice a little stronger. She had made a choice. It was a terrible, desperate choice. But it was hers. Get your things, Boone said. I have nothing, she said. He said that, Boone replied, glancing at Hatcher. And I bought you these. He reached into the sack at his feet and pulled out a pair of boots. They were not new, but they were sturdy, fur-lined, and soft. He must have bought them from Hatcher earlier. He also pulled out a heavy wool blanket and a thick, mended man's coat. Put them on, he said. The night's cold. Clara sat on the floor and pulled the boots on. They were too big, but the fur lining was the most wonderful, warm sensation she had ever felt. She stood and wrapped the blanket around her shoulders, then slid her arms into the heavy coat. It smelled of him, pine, and smoke, and cold, clean air. All right, Hatcher said, defeated. I'll write up a bill of, well, I'll mark it in the ledger. You do that, Boone said. He picked up his sacks. "Come on, girl." He led her out of the store. The night air was biting. The snow was falling in earnest now. Thick, wet flakes that clung to the world, silencing it, turning it white. His horse, a massive black gelding, was tied to the porch rail, along with a mule laden with his supplies. The horse huffed, its breath pluming in the dark. Clara stopped. This was real. She was leaving with a man she did not know, a man people feared, and she was going to a place she could not imagine. Elias loaded his mule, his movements economical and sure. He finished, then turned to her. He saw her hesitation. He did not speak. He just walked to the horse, then turned and looked at her. He was waiting. Clara took a breath. She walked to him. He put his big calloused hands on her waist. She flinched, but his grip was impersonal, firm. He lifted her as if she weighed no more than a child, settling her side saddle on the horse's back. The saddle was still warm from him. He grabbed the reins, swung himself up behind her, and settled into the saddle. She was suddenly surrounded by him. His broad chest was at her back. His arms were on either side of her as he held the reins. She was enveloped in his warmth and the leathery, wild scent of him. He was a solid wall of heat and muscle. He nudged the horse with his heels. With a jingle of harness, the horse moved, and they were walking away from Dry Creek Crossing. Clara did not look back. She saw the light in the store window, a small yellow square, and then it was gone, obscured by the falling snow. They rode into the darkness. The only sound was the creak of the saddle and the soft thud of the horse's hooves in the fresh snow. The world disappeared, leaving only the man at her back and the white, swirling flakes in front of them. She was terrified. He was a giant, a stranger, a man who lived by his own laws. He was taking her to a place where no one would hear her if she screamed. He was the wilderness, and he was claiming her, but he was warm. He had given her boots. He had given her his coat. He had not looked at her with disgust or pity. He had looked at her like he needed her. She leaned back, just a fraction, against his solid chest. He did not stiffen. He just held her. The snow fell thicker, covering their tracks, erasing her past. A desperate, impossible hope began to beat in her chest, weak as a bird's wing. But there, she had run from one cage, only to be caught by something wilder. She did not know if this was freedom or just a different kind of prison. But as she rode into the mountains, pressed against the warmth of the mountain man, Clara knew one thing. She was, for the first time in her life, not useless. She was, to this man, a wife, and for now, that was enough to keep the fear at bay. They rode for what felt like half the night. The snowstorm turned from a gentle flurry into a driving, blinding wall of white. Clara, encased in Elias's coat and wrapped in the blanket, was pressed so firmly against his back that she felt she was part of him. She was numb, not just from the cold, but from a bone-deep weariness that went beyond her body. She must have slept, a fitful, jarring doze, because she was startled awake when the horse finally stopped. "We're here," Elias said. His voice, spoken so close to her ear, rumbled through her. He swung down from the saddle. For a moment, she was left on the horse, high above the ground. He came to her side. "Give me your hands." She did, and he gripped her waist again, lifting her down. Her legs, stiff and unfeeling, buckled. He caught her easily, his arm a band of iron around her ribs, holding her upright until she found her balance in the deep snow. She looked up. She could see almost nothing. The snow was too thick, but there was a shape, a dark, solid block against the white chaos. A cabin. It was not a cabin. It was a fortress, built of massive dark logs, chinked so tightly not a flicker of light escaped. It was dug into the side of a hill, sheltered by a stand of enormous pines that groaned under the weight of the new snow. It looked less like a home and more like a piece of the mountain itself. He took a canvas-wrapped parcel from the mule and pushed open the heavy plank door. A wave of warmth, stale and smelling of wood smoke and cured hides, washed over her. "In," he said. Clara moved past him, stumbling over the threshold. She stepped into near total darkness. She heard him behind her, stomping the snow from his boots. A match rasped against stone, a flare of yellow light, and he touched the flame to the wick of a lantern sitting on a rough-hewn table. The light spread, pushing the shadows into the corners. The cabin was one large room. To her left, a massive stone fireplace, its hearth black with soot. To her right, a simple counter with shelves holding tins, sacks, and a few iron pots. In the far corner, a bed frame, piled high with furs. A long rifle and two smaller ones were mounted on the wall above it. The entire space was meticulously clean, but undeniably male. It was the den of a large, solitary animal. He did not speak to her. He moved to the fireplace, knelt, and began to lay a fire. His hands were huge, scarred, yet they moved with precision, stacking kindling and larger logs. Clara just stood by the door, a small, dripping, lost thing. She was in another world. The silence here was different from the silence of the trail. That had been an empty, lonely silence. This was a heavy, living silence, thick as the snow outside, broken only by the man's movements and the rising howl of the wind. Elias set the fire to light, and it caught with a hungry whoosh. He stood, turning to her. He looked at her, soaked and shivering. "Coat," he said. She fumbled with the buttons, her fingers too numb to work. He brushed her hands away, not unkindly, and undid the heavy coat himself. He slid it off her shoulders. He did the same with the wet blanket. He tossed them onto a peg near the fire. She stood there in her thin, torn calico dress, shivering violently. He went to a large wooden trunk at the foot of his bed. He opened it, dug inside, and pulled out a set of clothes. He tossed them to her. "They're clean. Wear them." They were his. A pair of long wool underdrawers and a heavy flannel shirt. They were absurdly large, but they were soft, and they were dry. He turned his back to her, a gesture of privacy so stark it was almost courtly. He faced the fire, adding more wood. Clara quickly stripped off her damp, filthy dress. The wool of the underdrawers was itchy, but the warmth was immediate and profound. She pulled the flannel shirt over her head. The sleeves hung a foot past her hands. She felt like a child playing dress-up in her father's clothes. I am dressed," she said. He turned. His eyes took in the small girl lost in his clothes. His face did not change. He pointed to a corner near the hearth, opposite his own bed. There, a thick, pristine bedroll, the softest, newest sheepskin, was laid out. "That's yours." He then went to the counter, took a large iron pot, and began to work. He moved with the same economy he had shown with the fire. He sliced salt pork from a slab, chopped onions and carrots from a small root cellar bin, and added them to the pot with the water from a bucket. He hung the pot on a hook over the fire. Soon, the cabin filled with the smell of food. Clara had not eaten a real meal in weeks. The aroma was a physical assault. It made her dizzy. Her stomach cramped painfully. She drifted closer to the fire, drawn by the heat and the smell. She sat on the floor, on a small braided rug near her bedroll, and watched the pot. She did not know what else to do. When the stew was done, he ladled a thick, steaming portion into a wooden bowl and handed it to her, along with a spoon. He did the same for himself and sat on a stool across the hearth. Clara stared at the bowl. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. There were chunks of meat, soft vegetables, and a thick, savory broth. Her hand trembled as she lifted the spoon. She ate. She did not just eat, she fell upon the food. She shoveled the hot stew into her mouth, barely chewing, swallowing so fast she nearly choked. She was an animal, and she knew it, and she could not stop. She finished the bowl in less than a minute. She looked up, breathing hard, her face flushed with shame. She was waiting for the disgust, the look of contempt she had seen from Mrs. Hatcher. Elias Boone was eating his own stew. He ate slowly, deliberately. He had not looked at her. He had not watched her. He did not comment when she finished, and he did not comment on the desperate, starving way she had eaten. He simply pushed the pot, still hanging over the fire, a little closer to her side, an invitation, Clara ladled a second, smaller portion, and this time, she forced herself to eat slowly. The food was a miracle. It spread warmth and life through her limbs. When she was done, she felt a profound, heavy satisfaction. She had not felt this in so long, she had forgotten what it was like to not be hungry. When they were finished, he took her bowl, and his own, and scraped them clean. He did not ask for help. "The water bucket is there," he said, pointing to a pail by the door. "Outhouse is 20 yards north. Don't go farther than that, not in this storm." He took his rifle from the wall, checked its load, and sat in a heavy wooden chair by the door, facing it. He was not going to bed. He was going to watch. Clara, overwhelmed and exhausted, crawled into the bedroll. The sheepskin was impossibly soft. It smelled of lanolin and cedar. She pulled the wool shirt down over her knees, curled into a tight ball, and fell asleep to the sound of the wind screaming outside and the quiet, steady presence of the man in the chair. The days that followed were a study in awkwardness. Clara woke the next morning to an empty cabin. The fire was banked, the room was warm, and a fresh stack of firewood was piled by the hearth. The water bucket was full. He was gone. She panicked. For a moment, had he left her? She ran to the door and pulled it open. The world was a blinding, pristine white. The snow had stopped. The sun was brilliant on a landscape of impossible, silent beauty. There was no sign of him. She spent the day in a haze. She was a prisoner, but her cage was a warm cabin in the middle of a stunning, deadly wilderness. He returned at dusk. He carried a fresh-killed rabbit and his rifle. He did not say where he had been. He just nodded to her, skinned the rabbit with a few expert motions, and began to prepare their supper. This became their routine. He would be gone at dawn, checking his trap lines, hunting, doing whatever it was a mountain man did. He left her with food, water, and wood. He returned at dusk. They ate in silence. He would sit by the fire, cleaning his rifle, mending a trap, or sharpening his knives. She would sit in her bedroll, watching. Elias rarely spoke. He was not a man who used words for comfort, but he noticed everything. He noticed the way she shivered, even by the fire, and the next day, a second, heavier blanket appeared on her bedroll. He noticed her wincing as she walked in his 2 large boots to the outhouse, and the following evening, he handed her a pair of thick wool socks, nearly new. He left her alone. He gave her space. In the small cabin, he managed to make her feel as if she were not crowding him. He never looked at her while she dressed or undressed in the mornings or evenings. He never watched her sleep. It was a respect she had not expected, a respect she had never been given, even in her stepfather's house. But the silence and her own idleness began to eat at her. He was feeding her, clothing her, keeping her warm. He had called her his wife, but she was a burden. The shame that had driven her from Dry Creek returned with a vengeance. She had to try. Her first attempt was bread. She had watched her mother's cook do it. Once or twice, it was just flour and water. She found the sack of flour, precious, bought with his furs, and a tin of yeast. She mixed it in a bowl, but she used cold water. And the dough was a sticky, glue-like paste that refused to rise. When Elias returned, he found the gray, solid lump on the counter. He said nothing. He just looked at the wasted flour, then at her. He took the bowl and scraped the contents into the woods for the animals. He made their supper of fried salt pork and beans. She burned the beans. She had been tasked with watching them while he brought in more wood. She was so lost in her own misery, staring at the fire, that she let the pot boil dry. The beans were scorched, a black, bitter crust at the bottom of the pot. Elias came in, smelled the smoke, and took the pot from the fire. He looked inside. A whole meal. Ruined. Clara burst into tears. "I am sorry. I am so sorry. I am useless. I am. She fled to her bedroll, burying her face, her shoulders shaking with sobs. She was a failure. She was going to starve them both. She waited for his anger. She waited for him to shout. to call her the name she deserved. Instead, she heard him scrape the pot. He managed to salvage about half the beans. He sat at the table and began to eat them, cold and smoky. She heard him sigh. It was not a sound of anger, but of weariness. She felt his presence beside her. She looked up, her eyes blurred with tears. He was kneeling by her bedroll, holding out a spoon with a few of the salvaged beans on it. "Eat," he said. "I ruined them." She wept. "They're just beans." He pushed the spoon closer. "Eat. You need the strength." She ate the beans from the spoon. He was not angry. He was practical. He sat back on his heels. His large, scarred face was serious in the firelight. He was not a man who knew how to offer comfort, so he offered truth instead. "I was 20, he said, his voice a low rumble. "Signed on with the Army. Thought I'd be a man. They sent us to Utah. Winter came early. We got lost, separated from the supply train." He stared at the fire, seeing a past she could not imagine. "We ate the mules, then we ate the leather from the saddles. I had a partner, a young man from Ohio. He didn't make it. I nearly didn't." He looked at her, his gray eyes clear and hard. "I was so hungry. I couldn't remember my own name. I didn't know how to set a snare. I didn't know how to find dry tinder. I didn't know how to survive. I was useless, and I nearly died for it." He held up his massive, calloused hands. "You learn, or you die." I learned. He stood, looming over her. "No shame in not knowin'," Elias Boone said. "Shame's in not trying. You're trying. Now, stop crying. It wastes water." He went back to his chair. Clara stared at him. He had not pitied her. He had not offered soft words. He had taken her failure and matched it with his own. He had told her that she was not her mistakes. She was her effort. Something in her chest, a knot of old, cold shame, began to loosen. She began to learn. She watched him. She learned that he took his coffee black, and so strong it was almost sludge. She learned that he always woke before the sun, that he never hummed or whistled, that the silence he carried was a shield. She learned his history in broken pieces. One day, she found a tarnished Army-issue button in the bottom of his mending box. When she asked about it, he grunted, left that life behind. He was a runaway, a deserter, another time, mending his heavy coat. She was learning to sew, her stitches clumsy and large, but holding. She felt a lump in the lining. It was a bullet, flattened and deformed. She held it out to him. He took it. "My brother, Jacob, he was always a better shot than me." He tossed the bullet into the fire. The betrayal in his voice was an old, cold thing. And one afternoon, he returned from his trap line early, his face pale. He was limping heavily. "Elias, you're hurt." "Old wound," he growled, sitting hard on his stool. He pulled up his trouser leg. On his thigh, just above the knee, was a deep, puckered scar. It was an old bullet wound, and the winter cold had settled in it, making it ache. Clara, without thinking, took a cloth and dipped it in the warm water from the kettle, and began to hot-press the wound. He hissed, but he let her. She was touching him, her small hands on his scarred, powerful leg. He had lost someone. She knew it. She had seen him, some nights, staring at the empty space on the wall above her bedroll. She had seen him touch a small, carved wooden bird he kept on the mantel, but she did not dare ask about that. She did not dare ask about the name she had never heard him speak. The cabin grew smaller as the winter deepened. They lived in each other's space. She learned the smell of him, of pine and gunpowder and clean sweat. He learned the sound of her, the quiet way she moved, the soft sigh she let out when she was reading. He had books. Not many, but good ones. Shakespeare, the Bible, a book on Roman history. One evening, the tension that had been building between them finally found a voice. He was sitting by the fire, sharpening his skinning knife. The shing, shing, shing of the whetstone was the only sound. Clara was reading, but she was not seeing the words. She was watching his hands. They were so large, yet so careful. She stood, meaning to get a drink of water. She had to pass his chair. As she did, she stumbled. The leg of her wool drawers, too long, caught under her foot. She fell toward him. He moved, fast as a cat. He dropped the knife and caught her. His hands were on her waist, the same way they had been at the trading post. But this was different. She was in his arms. She was looking up at him. His face was inches from hers. The scar on his cheek looked raw in the firelight. His gray eyes were dark, fixed on her mouth. The world stopped. The wind died. The fire went silent. There was only the heat from his hands, burning her through the thick flannel. He leaned in. It was a slow, deliberate movement. She could smell the soap on his skin. She was so close. This was what a husband did. This was what the rancher in Missouri had wanted. Her past rose up and choked her. The memory of her stepfather's hand, of the rancher's wet mouth. Clara flinched. It was a small, sharp movement, a pulling back, a closing off. Elias Boone froze. He saw the fear in her eyes. He saw the way her body had gone rigid. He did not get angry. He did not press. He did not demand. He pulled back, instantly. He released his grip on her waist as if she had burned him. He stood, grabbed his heavy coat from the peg, and was gone. The door slammed shut, leaving her alone in the sudden, echoing silence. Clara stood by the fire, her heart hammering so hard it hurt her ribs. She was breathing as if she had run a mile. She had wanted it, a part of her, a deep, secret part, had wanted him to kiss her, but the fear had been stronger. She stared at the door. He was out there, in the dark, in the snow, because she had flinched. She felt a wave of shame, new and sharp, not because she was useless, but because she had hurt him. She waited. An hour passed, then 2. He did not return. She was terrified he would not come back, that she had broken the one rule of their arrangement, that she had proven to be not just useless, but untouchable. She went to her bedroll. She lay down, but she did not sleep. She listened to the fire crackle. She listened to the wind, and then she heard it, a howl. Long and lonely and terribly close. A wolf. Her blood ran cold. She sat bolt upright. The sound came again, closer this time. She looked at the door. The bar was not set. The door opened. Elias came in. He was covered in a fine dusting of snow. He did not look at her. He moved to the door, his face a mask of stone, and slid the heavy wooden bar into place. He leaned his rifle against the wall, next to his chair. He did not sit. He just stood by the hearth, staring into the flames, his back to her. He was a pillar of anger, or hurt, or something she could not name. The wolf howled again, a mournful, hungry sound, just outside the cabin wall. Clara curled into her bedroll, her hands over her mouth. Elias turned. He looked at her, a small, terrified shape in the softest bedroll. He looked at the barred door. He looked at his rifle. He picked up the rifle. He did not go to his bed. He sat in the heavy wooden chair, the one between her and the door. He laid the rifle across his knees. He did not speak. He just sat, awake, and watched. Clara lay in the darkness, listening. The wolf howled for another hour, a wild, lonely lament. But the sound was outside. The danger was outside. Inside, the cabin was warm. The fire was strong. And the silent, scarred man she had been so afraid of was sitting between her and the dark, his rifle on his lap, guarding her. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in her entire life, Clara felt impossibly and completely safe. The world shrank. The snows of December buried the mountains, and then the snows of January buried them deeper. The cabin became an island in a sea of white, the sky a permanent, cold gray. The wind was a constant, mournful voice, the only sound in a world that had gone utterly silent. Clara, who had once feared the silence, now found a rhythm in it. She was no longer a guest. She was a partner, however unskilled. She learned. The learning was a hard, physical thing, written on her body. Her hands, once soft and pale, became chapped, then calloused. She learned to split kindling, a task that had seemed impossible. At first, she could barely lift the axe. Elias showed her once, his movements economical. Let the steel do the work, aim true. He did not help her again. She spent a whole morning in the biting cold, swinging and missing, crying in frustration, until finally, a piece of pine split with a satisfying crack. She had bundled the small pieces in her arms, her first true offering, and brought them in. Elias had looked at the pile, then at her. "Good," he said. That one word was more praise than her stepfather had given her in a decade. She learned to make his coffee, the way he liked it, boiled with the grounds until it was a thick, bitter draft that could, she felt, raise the dead. She learned to patch his clothes. Her first stitches were knots and tangles, crooked and ugly. She pricked her fingers until they were raw, but the patches held. When he came in from checking his traps, he would hand her a torn shirt, and she would sit by the firelight, her brow furrowed, her tongue caught between her teeth, and she would mend. He never patronized her. He never said, "This is how a woman does it." He simply watched her efforts, and when she succeeded, he would nod. When she failed, as she still often did with bread, he would eat the burned, dense bricks without complaint, a silent testament to the fact that her effort was enough. One morning, she woke to find him gone, as usual, but something was on her bedroll. It was a dress. She touched it, thinking it was one of his shirts, but she pulled it out, and it unfolded. It was a dress of dark, forest green wool, thick and warm. It was simple, with a high neck and long sleeves, but it was sturdy. It was new, and it was her size. She held it up, the wool brushing her chin. It was not a dress from the store. The stitches were small and even, far better than her own, but they were hand-stitched. She thought of the trading post, of Mrs. Hatcher. Elias must have paid the woman, given her Clara's measure by sight alone. Weeks ago. He had known, even as he brought her here, that she had nothing. He had planned for her. Clara stripped off the oversized flannel shirt she slept in and pulled the dress over her head. It settled on her shoulders with a soft, perfect weight. It fit. It truly fit. It was the first thing in this new world that felt like it was hers. She sat on her bedroll, her hands smoothing the wool over her knees, and she cried. She cried silently, not from fear or shame, but from a strange, aching gratitude. He had seen her as a woman, not just a set of hands. He had clothed her. When he returned at dusk, he said nothing. He just looked at her, standing by the fire in the green dress, for a moment longer than usual. Then he nodded, as if a long-held question had been answered, and turned to hang up his rifle. The winter wore on, and the walls of the cabin seemed to draw in, the physical space between them, once a vast territory of awkwardness, began to shrink. "You'll learn to shoot," he announced one morning. The air was so cold, it was a pain to breathe. I don't know how," Clara said, her stomach twisting. "I know," he said. "That's why you'll learn. I can't be here every second. The mountains are not forgiving. You'll protect yourself, and you'll protect the cabin." He took her out, 20 yards from the door. The snow was packed hard. He handed her one of the smaller rifles. It was heavy, the wood smooth and the steel biting cold. "This is a Winchester. It's light. It'll do." He showed her how to load it, how to work the lever, how to sight down the barrel. She tried to mimic him, but the rifle was clumsy in her arms. She was afraid of it. "You're holding it wrong," he said, his voice flat. "You're fighting it." She tried again, lifting it to her shoulder. It was too heavy. "No." His voice was behind her. She felt his presence, a wall of heat in the frozen air. "Like this." He stepped behind her. He did not ask. He simply enclosed her. His body pressed against her back, a solid, warm shield against the wind. His left arm came around her, his large hand covering hers on the rifle's forestock. His right arm came around her other side, his hand settling over hers on the trigger guard. He was everywhere. She was surrounded by him. She could feel his chest rise and fall against her shoulder blades, his breath Pluming in the air was a white cloud next to her cheek. She could smell the pine and wood smoke on his coat, the faint, clean scent of his skin. "You set the stock here," he rumbled, his voice in her ear. He nudged her shoulder with his chin. "Press it in, hard, or it will kick you. Don't be afraid of it. Make it part of you." His hand on hers was a vice. He guided her, aiming at a dark knot on a distant, snow-covered pine. "Breathe out," he commanded. "Half a breath, then squeeze. Don't pull." Clara couldn't breathe at all. Her body was rigid. She was trembling, but it was not from fear of the gun. It was from him. It was the solid, unyielding strength of him. It was the rough texture of his coat against her cheek. It was the first time he had held her since the horse, and this was not impersonal. This was an instruction. She felt the tremble move through her, and she knew he felt it. He said nothing. His grip just tightened, steadying her. "Squeeze," he said again, his voice softer. She did. The rifle exploded. The sound was a shock, ripping the silence. The recoil slammed into her shoulder, a hard, painful punch that jolted her entire body back against his. His arms were steel, holding her, absorbing the shock. She had missed the tree by 3 feet. She was breathing hard, her ears ringing. He stepped back. The warmth was gone. The cold air rushed in to fill the space. "Again," he said, his voice as flat as before. She stared at him, her heart pounding. His face was unreadable. He had felt it. He had felt her tremble, and he had felt her lean into the recoil, into him. He gave no sign. She turned back to the tree, reloaded the rifle on shaky legs, and this time she held it true. A week later, the sky turned a low, bruised purple, and the wind stopped. "A big one is coming," Elias said, staring out the tiny, frost-covered window. "We have 3 hours of light. We'll bring in all the wood we can. We'll need it." For 3 hours. They worked. They hauled wood from the big pile he kept under a tarp, stacking it inside until it reached the ceiling by the hearth. They filled every bucket with fresh snow to be melted for water. Just as dusk fell, the storm hit. It did not just snow. The wind screamed, a high-pitched, tearing sound that seemed to want to pull the cabin from its foundations. The world disappeared in a solid, churning wall of white. For 5 days, they were trapped. The cabin, which had become her world, now became the world. There was no outside. There was only the roar of the wind and the 4 walls. The first day, they were busy. He mended harnesses. She cooked, a real meal, a stew with some of the dried vegetables he'd bought at the post. The second day, the silence began to stretch. They were forced into a proximity that was new. They sat at the small table, eating. Their knees brushed. Clara jerked hers back. Elias did not. The third day, a strange, giddy tension set in. Clara, fighting the oppressive roar of the storm, found herself telling a story about her mother's cat, a silly, fussy animal that had once fallen into a butter churn. She hadn't meant to. The story just came out. When she finished, she looked at Elias, terrified she had broken his sacred silence. He was looking at her, a strange, small smile pulling at the corner of his mouth, the one without the scar. A low rumble came from his chest. It was a chuckle, a real quiet laugh. The sound shocked her more than the storm. It warmed her, down to her toes. He told her about a bear that had stolen his entire side of bacon, and how the bear had sat on a ridge, eating it, while Elias had yelled curses at it. They laughed. The sound was alien and wonderful in the small, besieged cabin. The 4th day, the laughter faded. The air grew thick again. They were too close. They were too aware. Every accidental brush of his hand as he passed her the coffee pot. Every time she had to squeeze past him in the narrow space between the table and the bed. The air crackled. On the 5th night, the storm was finally easing. The wind had died to a low moan. The fire was burning low. Elias had been staring into the flames for an hour, his face carved from shadow. Clara was restless. She stood by the hearth, not wanting to go to her bedroll. She was She did not know what she was. She was waiting. He stood. He was so large. He seemed to fill the room. He did not go to his bed. He came to her. He stood in front of her, so close she had to tilt her head back to see his face. He was just looking at her, his gray eyes searching her face in the dim light. "Clara," he said. It was the first time he had used her name in days. "Elias," she whispered. He lifted one of his huge, scarred hands. He touched her face. It was not a father's touch or a brother's. His thumb moved, slowly, tracing the line of her cheekbone. His hand was rough, but his touch was impossibly gentle. She did not flinch. She did not pull away. She leaned into his hand, closing her eyes. "You are not afraid," he murmured. It was not a question. "No," she whispered. "Not of you." He leaned down. It was slow, agonizingly slow. She felt his breath on her lips. He was giving her every chance to stop him, to turn her head, to flee. She did not. She rose on her toes, just a fraction, and met him. His lips were not soft. They were chapped and firm, tasting of coffee and the cold. It was not the kiss she had read about in her mother's poetry books. It was not a gentle, polite kiss. It was a kiss of profound, desperate, and silent truth. It was slow, and it was unsure. He did not know how to do this. She did not know how to receive it. He was a man made of stone, trying to be gentle. She was a broken bird, trying to be brave. He put his other hand on her waist, not to pull her closer, but just to hold her, to steady them both. It lasted only a moment. When he pulled back, his eyes were dark. The desire was there, raw and undeniable. But it was banked, held in check by a control so total it was frightening. He said nothing. He simply looked at her, his chest rising and falling. The air in the cabin had changed forever. It was no longer a shelter. It was a home. Clara knew, in that moment, that she did not belong here because she could split wood or patch a shirt. She belonged here because this man, who was a legend, who was fear and silence and wilderness, had looked at her and listened to her. And now, he had touched her like she mattered, like she was real. A week later, the thaw began. A false spring. Elias called it, but the snow was melting and the ground was visible in patches. "We need firewood," he said. "The big storm finished the stacks." They went out together. The air was warmer, the world dripping. They were walking along a ridge, Elias in the lead, when he stepped on a patch of wet, rotten ice hidden beneath the snow. It happened fast. His foot went through, he shouted, a sharp curse, and fell hard, his full weight twisting onto his left leg. Clara heard a sound, a sickening pop, and his cry. "Elias!" she screamed, scrambling down the slick bank. He was on his back, his face white, his teeth gritted. "It's the leg," he growled. "The old wound." She looked. His trousers, the ones she had mended just last week, were dark. A deep, arterial red was spreading on his thigh. "You've torn it open?" "I know," he hissed. "Help me up." Clara panicked. He was her mountain. He was her rock, and he was down. The wilderness, his wilderness, had broken him. "No!" The voice that came out of her was sharp, and it was not hers. It was a command. "Do not move. Let me look." He stared at her, stunned by her tone. She knelt in the snow and mud, with trembling hands. She took his knife from its sheath, the one he was always sharpening, and she cut the trouser leg from knee to hip. The wound was bad. The old bullet scar, a puckered, ugly thing, had been torn wide open by the fall. It was bleeding. A lot. "I have to stop the bleeding," she said, her voice shaking, but her hands, miraculously, were becoming steady. "Then we have to get you back." She tore a long strip from her own wool petticoat, the one under her new dress, and packed it against the wound. Hard. He roared, a sound of pure agony, and his hand shot out, grabbing her wrist. His grip was a steel trap. She looked him in the eye. "I have to—" He let her go. It took an hour to get him back. He leaned on her, a dead weight. She was not strong enough, but she did it. She hauled and dragged and pleaded. and he cursed and groaned, and together they fell through the cabin door. He collapsed onto his bed. Not her bedroll. He was a giant, felled. "The whiskey," he panted, his face slick with sweat. "And the black thread. The thickest needle." "No," Clara said. He opened his eyes. "What?" "Not whiskey. Hot water and soap. I will not have you die of filth." She built the fire up to a roar. She boiled water. She was terrified. She had never seen a wound this bad, but she was the only one there. She cut the rest of his trousers away. He was covered in sweat. She bathed him, cleaning the mud and blood from his leg. And she saw him. His body was a map of a hard life. The puckered, angry wound on his thigh. A long, white, healed knife scar that ran along his ribs. A patch of skin on his shoulder that was shiny and smooth. An old burn. He was a man made of scars. He watched her, his eyes glassy. The fever was already setting in. "You're a hard man. Elias Boone," she whispered, her hands gentle as she washed the skin around the wound. He grabbed her hand. They'll scare you. The scars." Clara looked at his face, at the scar on his cheek. She thought of the rancher in Missouri, with his soft hands and his unblemished, cruel face. She put her free hand on his scarred chest. "You don't scare me," she said, her voice soft but fierce. "Nothing about you scares me." His eyes closed. He was slipping. She stitched the wound. Her hands, trained on his shirts, were clumsy. The needle was thick, the thread was coarse. It was like sewing canvas. But she did it. She pulled the skin together, her stitches ugly but deep. She bandaged it with clean strips of a sheet. The fever took him. He was not in the cabin anymore. He was somewhere else. He was tossing, his big body shaking the bed frame. He was muttering, "Jacob, you damn traitor, not my brother. He was in the army. No, sir, the cold. We can't. So cold." Clara sat by his bed. She bathed his face with a cool cloth. She forced sips of water between his cracked lips. He was burning up. She sat for a day. She sat for a night. In the deepest part of the night, when the fire was low and the cabin was filled with the sound of his ragged, fevered breathing. He grew quiet. He opened his eyes, but he did not see her. He was looking at the ceiling. "Sarah," he whispered. The name was a blow. It hit Clara harder than the rifle stock had. "Sarah, I'm cold. I'm sorry. Sarah." His voice was not the rough growl she knew. It was tender, broken. Clara's hand, the one bathing his face, froze. A cold, sick feeling washed through her. Sarah, the woman he had lost, the woman whose name he would not speak, the woman he was clearly still in love with. Clara felt crushed. She was a replacement, a warm body, a servant, just like she'd always been. But in a different house. She wanted to run. She wanted to leave him. He groaned, his body twisting in pain. She looked at him, this man of scars, this man who had given her boots and a dress, and who had kissed her like she was the first real thing he had touched in years. He was in pain. Clara swallowed the rock in her throat. She dipped the cloth back into the cool water. She was a replacement. Fine, but she would not be useless. She kept working. She bathed his face. She held his hand. She did not sleep. She must have dozed. She woke with a start, her neck aching. She had fallen forward, her head resting on the edge of the mattress. The cabin was gray with the first light of dawn. It was quiet. Too quiet. His breathing. It was gone. "Elias," she gasped, sitting up, her heart stopping. He was looking at her. His eyes were clear. The fever was gone. He was pale and weak, but he was him. He was looking at her, and then he looked down. She was still holding his hand. Her small, chapped hand was clutching his large, calloused one. She had fallen asleep holding his hand. Elias Boone looked at the woman who had slept at his bedside, the woman who had seen his scars and stitched his flesh and heard his ghosts and had not run. He watched her, her face smudged with soot and fear, her hair a wild tangle. He did not speak. He just lifted his hand, the one she was holding, and with a strength she did not know he had, he squeezed her fingers. Something inside him, a place he had kept frozen for years, a place buried deeper than the winter snow, began to thaw. It softened, and it broke. The world began to melt. The great silent white of the winter gave way to a world of sound. Water was everywhere, dripping from the eaves, rushing in unseen creeks, gurgling under the softening snow. The air, which for months had been a sharp, clean pain, was now soft, carrying the smell of wet earth and pine resin. Spring was not a gentle arrival in the Beartooth Mountains. It was a muddy, chaotic, and violent thawing. Elias was weak for 2 weeks, but his strength returned with the same stubbornness as the returning sun. He moved with a limp, his healing legs stiff, but he did not rest. He was a man, Clara learned, who could not be idle, and now, neither could she. "The ground is clear on the south slope," he said one morning, handing her a spade. "It's the only place we'll get enough sun. It's time." The garden. It was a patch of rocky, unforgiving dirt that Elias had, at some point, cleared. She looked at the spade, then at the hard earth. It was another test, another mountain to climb. "I don't know how," she said, the old words coming to her lips. "You know how to use that." He pointed to the spade. "Turn the earth, break the rocks. The rest is just seed and water." So she dug, for days. Her back ached, her hands, which had just begun to heal from the kindling, blistered, broke, and bled. But this time, she did not cry in frustration. She set her jaw, just as he did, and she worked. She pulled stones. She turned the heavy, damp soil, and she felt a new, fierce pride. This was not mending. This was building. Her life, which had been confined to the 4 walls of the cabin, now expanded. She found a small, hidden coop, and Elias brought her 4 half-wild chickens he had traded for at some distant homestead. She began to gather eggs. They were small and brown, and to her, they were jewels. She learned the mountain. Elias, still limping, would take her out. He showed her the bright green shoots of wild onion, the fuzzy leaves of mullein for a cough, the yarrow that could help stop bleeding. She was a quick study. She had, after all, learned to read. And this was just another language. Her laugh, which she had thought was a thing lost in Missouri, returned. It came out in short, surprised bursts, usually at her own failures. She still burned the bread. It was a curse. She would pull a smoking, rock-hard loaf from the oven, and the cabin would fill with the smell of her failure. She would hold it up, a look of comical despair on her face. "It is a weapon, Elias. We could use it to fight off bears." And he, in turn, would take the loaf, break off a piece with a grunt, and chew it. "It has heart," he'd say, his scarred mouth twitching. And she would laugh, a real, full-throated laugh that made the cabin feel, finally, like a home. She was clumsy, but she was proud. Her mending was still a mess of crooked stitches, but his shirts no longer had holes. Her coffee was strong, her stew was good, and her garden, her precious, hard-won patch of dirt, was showing the first, hesitant pale green shoots. She was, she realized, useful. One afternoon, in the full warmth of late spring, she was on her knees in the garden, covered in mud, when his shadow fell over her. She looked up, squinting into the sun. Elias stood there. He was just watching her. He had been checking his traps, but he was empty-handed, almost. He said nothing. He had nothing in his hands. "No rabbits?" she asked, wiping a smudge of dirt from her nose, leaving a new one. He held out his hand. Not a rabbit, not a tool. He was holding flowers, a ring of them. He had woven them together. Small, impossibly blue mountain forget-me-nots, bright yellow buttercups, and sprigs of pale, fragrant clover. A crown of wildflowers. This man, this giant of scars and silence, who wrestled the wilderness and lived by the gun, had sat on a log somewhere, his massive, calloused fingers patiently weaving a crown of flowers. For her. Clara stared at it. Her throat closed. He still said nothing. He just held it out. It was, for him, a speech. It was poetry. She rose slowly, her muddy hands clasped at her chest. She did not know what to do. He looked shy. Elias Boone, who feared nothing, looked almost afraid. He took a step, and before she could think, he gently, almost reverently, placed the wildflower crown on her head, pushing her messy brown hair back from her face. His hands lingered. His thumbs rested on her temples. His gray eyes were dark, searching. He was so close. The air was thick with the smell of pine and the sweet, crushed clover. This was not the man who had kissed her in the cabin, the one who was hesitant and unsure. This was a man who had made a decision. This time, she did not wait. Clara stood on her toes. She put her muddy hands on his rough, bearded cheeks, and she kissed him. It was not the slow, unsure kiss of the winter. This was a kiss of gratitude. It was a kiss of belonging. It was a kiss that said, yes. He was not surprised. He was ready. His arms came around her, one hand sliding down to the small of her back, the other burying itself in her hair, crown and all, and he pulled her against him. He kissed her back. It was a kiss that owned her. It was deep, and it was hungry. It was months of shared silence, of fear, of unspoken tension. It was the memory of her trembling, and the memory of his fever. It was the proof that she was not useless, and that he was not stone. He lifted her off her feet, and her muddy boots dangled in the air as he deepened the kiss, his mouth claiming hers with a desperate, beautiful finality. He was the first to pull away, but only by an inch. He rested his forehead against hers, his breath ragged. His eyes were closed. "Clara," he whispered, and her name was a prayer. She was trembling, but not from fear, from awareness, from a heat that had nothing to do with the spring sun. He carried her into the cabin, the garden, the chickens, the world outside. It all disappeared. He kicked the door shut with his boot, and the sound echoed in the sudden, thick silence. He did not take her to his bed. He took her to hers. He sat her on the soft sheepskin bedroll, the one that had been her refuge, her island. He knelt before her, a giant of a man, making himself small. He gently took the muddy boots off her feet, his hands tender. The intimacy that followed was not a storm. It was a thaw. It was as nervous and awkward and intensely real as their life had been. He undressed her, his hands shaking slightly as he unbuttoned the green wool dress. She undressed him, her fingers clumsy on the rough buttons of his shirt, her eyes tracing the white, healed scar on his ribs. This was not like the books. It was a tangle of limbs, a moment of laughter when his elbow hit the water bucket, a moment of sharp, sudden tears on her part for reasons she could not name. She was so ashamed. The rancher in Missouri, her stepfather's words, useless, broken goods. She turned her face away. I cannot, Elias, I am not what you want. I have never, no one has ever. She choked on the words, on the old, deep shame of being unwanted. He stopped. He did not press. He did not demand. He took her face in his hands. His rough thumbs wiped the tears from her cheeks. He waited until she looked at him. His gray eyes were clear, fierce, and utterly, devastatingly kind. "Clara," he whispered, his voice a low, rough vow. "You are not broken." He kissed her forehead. He kissed her eyelids. He kissed the tears on her cheeks. "You are mine," he said, "and you are whole." He made love to her. It was slow. It was emotional. He taught her, with his body, what he could not say in words, that she was cherished, that she was safe, that she was, for the first time in her life, exactly in the right place. When it was over, she lay in his arms, her head on his scarred chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. She had never known such peace. They fell into a new rhythm, one of connection. They were a husband and wife. The cabin was too small for 2 beds, so her bedroll was rolled up and put away. She slept with him, in his bed, her body curled against his back, They talked more. Quiet murmurs in the dark. But one name still lay between them. A ghost. One night, as they lay by the dying embers, his hand idly stroking her hair, she found the courage. "Elias?" He rumbled, half asleep. "Who was Sarah?" His hand stopped. The muscles in his chest and arm went rigid. The air in the cabin, so warm and safe, suddenly grew cold. He was silent for a full minute. Clara held her breath. She had broken the spell. She had gone too far. She started to pull away, to apologize. "I'm sorry, I should not have—" His arm tightened, holding her in place. "No," he said, his voice rough. "You have a right to ask. You are my wife." He took a deep breath, and the story came out, flat and hard, like stones he was pulling from his own chest. "Sarah was my wife," he said, his voice hollow, staring at the ceiling. "My first wife. We grew up together, back in— before the army, before Jacob." He paused, gathering himself. "We were married. She was good. She was kind. She was everything I was not." Clara's heart ached. She stayed silent. She laced her fingers through his, the hand that rested on his chest. She held his hand. We were going to have a child," he said, and his voice broke. "Just for a second. A tiny fissure in the stone. It was winter, a hard winter. The baby. It wouldn't come right. The midwife couldn't turn it." He closed his eyes. "She died. She labored for 2 days, and she died. The baby, a boy, he died with her." He was silent. Clara squeezed his hand. "I buried them," he whispered. "I buried them both on the same day, and I left. I walked away from it all. I came out here. I signed on with the army. I wanted to disappear. When that didn't work, I came here, to the mountains. I left the world. I didn't want— I couldn't— He couldn't be around people. She finished for him. He couldn't bear to lose anyone ever again. He had left the world, and she had been thrown out of it. And they had found each other. "Thank you for telling me," she whispered, her voice thick. He turned his head, his gray eyes finding hers in the darkness. "She is my past. Clara, you are mine now." He kissed her, a deep, slow kiss of truth, and the ghost of Sarah, while not banished, quietly moved aside, making room. The next week, their supplies were low. The thaw was real. The pass to Dry Creek was open. "We need flour," he said, "and salt, and you need a new pair of boots, real ones." Clara felt a flicker of fear. The town, Mrs. Hatcher, the judging eyes. "We will go together," Elias said, seeing her face. They rode down the mountain, Elias on his black gelding, Clara on the mule. The journey that had been a terrifying, blind flight in a blizzard was now a beautiful ride through a green, budding world. When they reached Dry Creek, Clara felt different. She was not the barefoot, starving wretch who had arrived on the freight wagon. She was dressed in her clean green wool dress. Her hair was brushed and tied back with a leather thong. She wore the sturdy, if oversized, boots he had given her. She sat tall on the mule. She was Mrs. Boone. They walked into Hatcher's trading post. The silence was immediate. Mrs. Hatcher, who was measuring cloth, dropped her scissors. Mr. Hatcher, behind the counter, froze. 2 trappers who had been at the stove stopped their conversation. They all stared at Clara. They stared at the way she walked beside Elias, at the way his hand rested on the small of her back. Clara's face burned, but she held her head high. She had survived a bear-tooth winter. She had stitched a man's leg. She was not afraid of these people. "Hatcher," Elias said, his voice a low rumble. He handed him a list. As Elias began to trade, Mrs. Hatcher approached Clara. Her eyes were sharp, looking Clara up and down. "Well," the woman said, her voice not as sharp as Clara remembered, but still curt. "You survived. Then he didn't eat you." "No, ma'am," Clara said, her voice quiet but clear. He did not. He was hurt. One of the trappers, a grimy man named Silas, piped up. He took a bad fall. He did, Clara said, turning to him. I stitched him up. Silas let out a wheezing laugh. You stitched him. That's a good one. He looked her over, his eyes lingering in a way that made her skin crawl. Or maybe you just kept his bed warm. That's all a useless thing like you is good for. A warm bed. Clara flinched. The old wound. Useless. Elias, who had been inspecting a sack of flour, went still. The air in the store dropped 20 degrees. Before Clara could even gasp. Before the man could laugh again. Elias moved. He was not a man. He was a force of nature. He crossed the store in one long stride. He did not say a word. He grabbed Silas by the front of his coat, lifted him clean off the floor, and slammed him against the rough-hewn wall. A keg of nails rattled. Jars on the shelf shook. The man's head hit the wood with a sickening thud. He choked, his eyes wide with terror. "Elias!" Clara screamed. Elias's face was a mask of pure, cold fury. The scar on his cheek was a vivid white. His hand was fisted in the man's shirt, and his other hand was drawn back, his fist the size of a ham, ready to break the man's face. You will not speak to my wife," Elias snarled, each word a piece of ice. "Elias, no," Clara cried, grabbing his arm. "Please don't. Not for him. Not for me." He was trembling with rage. He looked at the terrified man. He looked at the other trapper, who had his hands up. He looked at Mrs. Hatcher, who was pale. Then he looked at Clara. He saw her face, not afraid of him, but afraid for him. Afraid of what he was about to do. His fist, the one that was drawn back, slowly, painfully, uncurled. His knuckles were white. He looked at Silas. "If you ever," he said, his voice a deadly whisper. "Look at her again. If you ever think her name again, I will come down from that mountain, and I will find you, and I will end you." He let go. Silas crumpled to the floor, gasping and coughing. Elias did not look at him again. He straightened his coat, his hands still trembling. He turned to Hatcher. "Our supplies." The rest of the trade was conducted in absolute, terrified silence. Elias paid, and they left. They rode in silence for the first mile, up the pass. Clara's heart was still hammering. She had seen the animal in him, the killer that the mountain had made, and she had seen him cage it. For her, that night, they sat by the fire. He had not spoken a word since they left the store. He was staring into the flames, his jaw set, his demons riding him hard. Clara went to him. She did not sit on her stool. She knelt on the floor between his knees. She took his hands. They were so large, so capable of violence. She kissed his scarred knuckles. She wrapped herself around him, her arms around his thick waist, her head resting on his chest, right over his heart. "You are the only man I ever chose," she whispered to the steady beat of his heart. "The only one. I was not sold to you. I was not given to you. I chose you." She felt his hands, which had been resting on the chair, come up. They settled on her back, holding her, pulling her closer. He buried his face in her hair. He held her as if she was the only thing keeping him from drifting away. The gossip from the town, he knew, would only get worse. They would call her a burden. They would call her his whore. They would call her useless. He pulled back, just enough to see her. He held her face, his thumbs on her cheeks, just as he had before their first kiss. "Let them talk," he said, his voice a low, fierce growl. "You're mine." The peace was a fragile, living thing, like the first green shoots in her garden. For weeks, as spring deepened into a lush, green summer, their life found its true rhythm. They were a single unit. She woke to the smell of his coffee, and he fell asleep to the sound of her quiet breathing. She learned the lines of his face as well as she had learned her mother's poetry. He learned the sound of her laugh, and he found, to his own astonishment, that he worked to hear it. Her world was the cabin, the garden, the chicken coop, and the man who filled them. She was no longer just useful. She was needed. His limp had faded, but he favored the leg. and she would rub it at night by the fire, her strong, sure hands working the ache from his muscles. He would watch her, his gray eyes soft in the firelight, and a quiet would settle over them that was not empty, but full. The trouble, when it came, arrived as quietly as Elias himself. He had gone to Dry Creek for salt and a new axe head. He was gone longer than usual. Clara, who had learned the cadence of his travels, felt the first prickle of unease as the sun began to dip behind the high peaks, painting the sky in shades of blood, orange, and violet. She was standing by the door, her hand on the frame, when she saw him riding up the trail. He was not riding with his usual steady, economical pace. He was pushing the gelding, and the mule was trotting behind. Hurried. He dismounted, not in his usual fluid motion, but with a stiff, angry energy. He did not greet her. He did not kiss her. He began unloading the mule with a speed that was almost violent, throwing the sacks of supplies onto the ground. "Elias," Clara said, her voice small. "What is it? What is wrong?" He stopped, his back to her. He was a stone wall. "Go inside. Clara, bar the door." "What has happened?" she insisted, her heart beginning to hammer. He turned. His face, in the fading light, was a mask of cold, controlled fury. The scar on his cheek was a pale, angry line. "There is a man in town, at Hatcher's." Clara's blood went cold. "A man? He is not a trapper. He is not a rancher. He wears a badge. But it is not a marshal's. It is a Pinkerton's badge, a bounty man. He is asking questions." Clara's hand flew to her mouth. She could not breathe. "What kind of questions?" she whispered, though she already knew. Elias's eyes never left hers. "He is looking for a runaway girl, from Missouri, 19 years old, brown hair, answers to the name of Clara. The world, her safe, warm, green world, tilted." She stumbled back, hitting the door frame. "No," she whispered. "No, he cannot be." "He is," Elias said, his voice flat. "He is offering a reward, $50. For her return." $50. She was worth $50. "He is staying at the post," Elias continued, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. "He told Hatcher he plans to search the homesteads in the high country, starting tomorrow. Starting with mine." Clara looked at him, her eyes wide with a terror she had not felt since the day she had fled. The past had found her. It had reached all the way from Missouri, and it was climbing their mountain. Elias saw the look on her face. He saw the pure, unadulterated panic. He stepped toward her. "Clara, who is he? Who sent him?" She shook her head, tears welling, shame and fear a bitter tide in her throat. It is my stepfather." "Your stepfather?" He sold me." She choked out the words, the confession she had held back, the last, ugliest piece of her past. "He sold me to a man, a rancher, Absalom Greaves, an old man with soft hands and a cruel mouth." She was crying now, the tears she had held back for months. "I was to be his wife, my stepfather." "He took the money, and I ran before the wedding." Elias stood there, his face carved from granite. "That is not a crime. Clara, a man cannot hunt you for running from a marriage." "Yes, he can," she cried, her voice breaking. "If he says I stole from him, that is what they do. My stepfather, he would have said I stole the money. He would have—" "Elias, you do not understand. This man, Greaves, he—" She had to stop, to take a ragged breath. "I was there for a week. Before I ran, he hit me, just once, because I would not let him touch me. He locked me in the cellar. It was dark. It was cold. He left me there for 2 days. He said he would break me, like a horse." She was shaking so hard she could barely stand. "I escaped. I ran. And my stepfather, he would have blamed me. He would have told GRE. He would have told the rancher and the law that I was wicked, that I was a thief, that I had to be brought back." She finally said the last, terrible part. "The bounty hunter, He is not just taking me back to my stepfather. He is taking me back to Absalom Greaves. He is taking me back to the cellar." Elias was silent. He did not move for a full minute. The only sound was Clara's desperate, hitched breathing. His fury was not a fire. It was a cold, deep, and terrible thing. It was the ice of the high peaks. It was the promise of a winter death. He did not touch her. He did not comfort her. He walked past her, into the cabin. He went to the wall where his rifles hung. He took down the large .50 caliber Sharps, the one he used for buffalo. He checked its load. He laid it on the table. He took down his Winchester. He checked it. He took down the shotgun. He went to the small box where he kept his ammunition. He began to line the cartridges up on the table, in neat, deadly rows. Clara watched him, her terror for herself now replaced by a new, colder terror. "Elias, what are you doing?" "He said he is coming here tomorrow," Elias said, his voice void of all emotion. "Let him come." "What? What do you mean?" "I mean," he said, sliding a shell into the shotgun, "that this cabin is built of thick logs. The windows are high. I have a clear field of fire for 300 yards in every direction. He is a bounty man. He is not a soldier. He will not be expecting a fight like this." Clara stared at him. You are going to fight him?" "I am going to end him," Elias said. He looked at her, his gray eyes flat. "He is not taking you. I will put him in the ground before he takes one step on that porch." "No!" Clara ran to him, grabbing the arm that was holding the shotgun. "No, Elias, you cannot. He has a badge. He is the law." "He is a man, coming to take my wife," Elias growled. "The law has no place on this mountain." "You will be a murderer," she screamed, her nails digging into his arm. "They will hang you. They will hunt you down. You will die. Elias, you will die for me." "It is a good day to die," he said, his voice still flat. "No," she sobbed, hitting his chest with her free hand. "I will not let you. I ran from one monster. I will not let you become one for me. I will not trade your life for my past. I would rather go with him." That stopped him. The word "go" hit him like a physical blow. He looked at her, and for the first time, he saw the true depth of her sacrifice. She would go back to the cellar to save him. His fury, met with her fierce, desperate love, broke. The ice cracked. He lowered the shotgun. "You are not going," he said, but the coldness was gone. His voice was just rough and tired. "Then what do we do?" she wept. "We cannot run. He will hunt us." Elias stood there, his mind, the mountain man's mind, the trapper's mind, which saw not just the bear but the track, not just the storm but the shelter, began to work. "No," he said, his voice quiet. He looked around the cabin. He looked at her. "We cannot run, and we will not fight." He put the shotgun down. "We will make him leave." "How?" "Bounty hunters are practical men," Elias said. "They do not hunt for sport. They hunt for money. If the quarry is gone, they stop hunting." "I do not understand," she said, wiping her face. "He is hunting a girl, a living girl." Elias's eyes found hers, and they were sharp and clever and cold again, but in a new way. "A dead girl is worth nothing." Clara's breath hitched. "Elias?" "We will fake your death," he said, the plan forming as he spoke. "We will make it a good death, a mountain death, one that leaves no doubt and no body to question." He went to her. He put his hands on her shoulders. "Clara, listen to me. There is no time. Here is what we must do." The plan was brutal, and it was fast. He grabbed one of his old, worn-out shirts and one of her own mended chemises from the trunk. "The dress you came here in, the calico. Where is it?" I tore it up for rags, for the garden," she stammered. "Good, better." He grabbed the rag bag. He pulled out a few stained, faded strips of the calico. "This is what you were wearing. You were down by the creek, washing. You were careless." He grabbed his hunting rifle. "I am going now. I need a deer. A big one. While I am gone, I need you to pack food for 2 weeks. Blankets, the heavy pot, the axe, the small rifle. Do not pack your clothes. Pack my clothes, the ones you wore when you first came. You will leave everything else. You will leave the green dress. Leave it? Yes, you will leave it on your bed, as if you were waiting to put it on. Now, go. And Clara, he said, his voice hard, when I return, we will not have time. We move. He was gone. Clara flew. She packed as he said. She packed dried meat, flour, coffee, salt. She packed his warmest spare clothes. She laid her green wool dress, the one he had given her, the one she loved, on their bed. A silent, heartbreaking offering. He was back in an hour. He did not have a deer. He had a massive, dead buck, slung over his horse. He did not gut it. He dragged it down to the creek, 50 yards from the cabin, in a small, rocky clearing. Now, he said. He took his knife. He did not bleed the deer. He sliced the flesh. Blood, dark and thick, poured onto the rocks. He took the strips of her calico dress and soaked them in it. He took the chemise and did the same. He ripped them, as if with claws. A bear, he said, his voice flat. A grizzly. Came on you at the creek. You screamed. I ran. I was too late. He scattered the bloody rags. He smeared the blood on the rocks. He took his knife and he scored the bark of a nearby aspen, high up, like a bear marking its territory. He will find this, Elias said. He will believe it. He took the deer carcass and hauled it deeper into the woods, dumping it for the scavengers. He returned, his arms bloody. Wash, he said. Quickly. Take what you have packed. We are leaving. We go high. They left. Clara, dressed in his old flannel shirt and wool trousers, took one last look at the cabin, at her green dress on the bed. It was the death of a life she had just found. They hiked for hours, Elias carrying the heaviest pack, pushing them upward, off the trail, into the high, rugged country he knew as his own. They did not stop until darkness fell. He had faked her death, but now he had to sell it. The next morning, at dawn, he left her. I have to go to town, he said. I have to tell Hatcher. I have to grieve. Elias, what if the bounty man, what if he doesn't believe you? He will, Elias said, his face a mask of stone. I will make him. He left her hidden in a cave, with a small rifle and the supplies. Do not make a fire. Do not move. I will be back by dark. Clara spent the day in terror. Elias walked into Hatcher's store. The bounty hunter, a man named Slade, was there, drinking coffee. Boone, Hatcher said, surprised. You're back soon. Elias did not answer. He walked to the counter. He was covered in mud. His face was gray. His hands were shaking. He was, for the first time, a broken man. Hatcher, Elias said, and his voice was a raw, strangled sound. I need a coffin, a small one. Hatcher stared. A coffin? Elias, what? It was a bear, Elias whispered, and he put his bloody, shaking hands on the counter. My wife, Clara, she was at the creek. I heard her scream. By the time I got there, there was nothing left, just blood and rags. God, the blood. He slumped. A giant brought low. Slade, the bounty hunter, stopped drinking his coffee. He looked at Elias's hands. He looked at the real, profound, animal grief on the mountain man's face. She's gone, Elias choked out. The bear. It took her. There is nothing left to bury, but I need a box to put her things in. Slade stood up. Your wife? He said, his voice sharp. Brown hair, from Missouri. Elias looked at him, his eyes dead. She was my wife, and she is gone. Slade looked at Hatcher. Hatcher looked at the floor. Mrs. Hatcher, in the corner, was crying. The bounty hunter looked at Elias's hands, at the mud. at the blood under his fingernails. He looked at the face of a man who had lost everything. "Damn," Slade said, quietly. He tossed a coin on the counter for the coffee. "A bear, you say? That's a hard way to go." "Elias," Hatcher said, his voice kind. "Come, sit. Martha, get him a whiskey." I cannot," Elias said. I have to go home. I have to clean. He turned. A man sleepwalking, and left the store. Slade watched him go. He looked at Hatcher. "Is he simple, or is that for real?" "Boone is not a man who lies," Hatcher said, his voice low. "And he is not a man who feels much. If he looks like that, it's real." Slade grunted. He looked at the piece of paper in his pocket, the one with Clara's description. He looked at the $50 reward. He looked at the mountains, dark and unforgiving. A bear. A girl torn apart. "Damn shame," Slade said. He crumpled the paper in his fist. Waste of a trip. Elias returned to Clara. He found her in the cave, pale and shaking. He did not say a word. He just walked to her, pulled her into his arms, and held her. He buried his face in her hair, and his body shook. He was not acting. The grief he had shown in the store, the grief of losing her, had been real. They stayed in the mountains for 2 weeks. They had to. Slade was still in town. Elias built a lean-to, a small, perfect shelter of pine boughs and fallen logs. So well hidden it was invisible from 10 yards away. They lived off trapped rabbits and the last of their flour. The world was stripped away. There was no garden, no cabin. There was only the wind, the cold, and each other. The fear was a constant presence, but despite it, they grew closer than ever. They were a single, hunted thing. They moved as one. They whispered at night, their bodies pressed together for warmth under the blankets. One afternoon, after a week, the grime and the fear were too much. I cannot stand it," Clara whispered. "I am filthy." He took her to a high-fed creek. The water was so cold it was a pain. Melted snow from the peaks. But it was clean. They were practical. They stripped, not with desire, but with purpose. They washed their clothes and laid them on the rocks to dry in the thin sun. And then they washed each other. He took a rag and washed her back, his large hands gentle, scrubbing the soot and fear away. She, in turn, washed his hair, her fingers massaging his scalp, an act of such profound, simple intimacy that it brought tears to her eyes. They were two, naked and cold, in the middle of a vast wilderness, and they were more married, more bound, than any preacher could have made them. That night, in the lean-to, she was curled against his chest. The wind was high, and she was afraid. The bounty hunter was still out there. Their lie was thin. "Elias," she whispered into the darkness. "I am here. Do you regret it?" He was silent. "Marrying me," she said, her voice small. "All this, the lies, the running, the danger, your life, it was quiet before me. It was peaceful." She felt him take a deep breath. He was quiet for so long. She thought he had fallen asleep or was ignoring her. When he spoke, his voice was a low, rough sound. So quiet she almost missed it. "Clara," he said, "I have been in the army. I have seen my brother try to kill me. I have buried my wife and my son. I have been alone on this mountain for 10 years, with ghosts." He shifted, his arm tightening around her, pulling her so close she could feel his heartbeat. "I have never," he said, his voice thick, "known peace. Not my whole life. Not for one single day." He kissed the top of her head. "Till you." He snuck down to the pass a week later. He lay on a ridge for half a day, watching the trail to Dry Creek. In the late afternoon, he saw him, Slade, the bounty hunter. His horse pointed east. He was not searching. He was leaving. He had given up. They returned to the cabin. It was silent and cold and safe. Her green dress was still on the bed, just as she had left it. That evening, Elias was cleaning his rifles. Clara was rebuilding the fire. She found the small canvas sack that Elias had taken to town. Inside, at the bottom, was a bundle. She pulled it out. It was the bloody, torn rags of her chemise and the calico. He had not, in his grief, left them at the creek. He had brought them as proof, and he had kept them. She looked at the bloody rags, the proof of her fake death, the symbol of her past. She looked at the woman she had been, the terrified, useless, running girl. She walked to the hearth. Elias looked up, his hand stilling on his rifle. Clara did not hesitate. She did not cry. She took the bundle of cloth, her old life, and she placed it in the center of the fire. The cloth smoked, then sizzled, then caught. The flames licked at the blood, at the calico, at the memory of Absalom Greaves in the cellar. They burned, bright and hot. Clara watched it all turn to black ash. She watched her past disappear, consumed by the heat. She was not that girl anymore. She turned back to her husband. He was watching her, his face quiet, his eyes knowing. She had let the past die. She was, at last, free. The months that followed were not a return to peace. They were the beginning of it. The lie they had built, the fake death that had freed her, receded. It was a scar, like his, a thing that had happened, but not a thing that ruled them. Summer arrived in the Beartooth Mountains, not as a gentle season, but as a vibrant, green, sudden explosion of life. Their home flourished. Clara's garden, which she had clawed from the rocky soil, was now a riot of green. She had beans climbing poles, thick-leafed squash, rows of onions, and hardy potatoes. She had, by some miracle, even managed to keep a patch of herbs alive. She was no longer just surviving the land. She was working with it. The cabin changed. It was no longer the dark male den she had first entered. It was clean. He had always kept it clean, but now it was bright. She had sewn curtains, clumsy and made of bleached flour sacks, but they were hers. She had found bright red clay by the creek and painted a small band of it around the rim of her water pitcher. There were wildflowers in a jar on the table, every day. Elias, seeing the life she was bringing to the cabin, was moved by an impulse he did not understand. He began to build. One morning, he just started, on the west side of the cabin. He laid a new foundation of stone. He felled trees. He began, with his patient, massive strength, to build a second room. He never said what it was for. Clara watched him. She would bring him water, and he would take it, his hand brushing hers, his eyes on the log he was hewing. "It is a fine room, Elias," she said one afternoon, watching him set a joist. "It's sturdy," he replied, not looking at her. She smiled. She knew what it was. It was a room for someday. It was a room for a cradle. It was a room for a life that stretched beyond just the two of them. It was the most profound declaration of love he could possibly make. The invitation came on a hot July afternoon. A rider, a young man from a homestead 15 miles down the valley, a neighbor they had never met, rode up. His name was Thomas Miller, and he was getting married. "Ma and Pa said, well, they said we should invite you," the young man said, nervous. He was clearly intimidated by Elias. "The wedding, it's next week, at our place, a dance and food." Clara, who had come out onto the porch, froze. Go down? To a gathering? With people? The fear of the trading post, of Silas's words, of Mrs. Hatcher's eyes, was still a cold knot in her stomach. Elias saw her face. He saw the flicker of her old fear. He stepped in front of her, just slightly. "We will be there. Thomas," Elias said, his voice a calm rumble. "You tell your PA we are grateful for the invitation." The young man looked relieved, nodded, and rode away. Clara turned. "Elias, we cannot. The town, what they said, and what if someone asks about my past?" He turned to her. He put one large hand on her shoulder. "You are Clara Boone. You are my wife. Your past is ash. We are going." She was terrified. But she was also, she realized, proud. He was not ashamed of her. He was not hiding her. He was taking her to a wedding. The night before the Miller wedding, she was washing her green wool dress, her only good dress, scrubbing it, hoping it would be presentable. Elias was quiet, sitting at the table, working on something by the light of the lantern. She thought he was mending a harness. When she finished, she hung the damp dress by the fire. "Clara," he said. She turned. He had a parcel on the table, wrapped in canvas. I made this," he said, and his voice was rough. He was shy. He pushed the parcel toward her. "For the wedding." She unwrapped it. Inside was a dress. It was not wool. It was a soft, white cotton, simple and clean. She held it up. It was beautiful. She looked at the stitches. They were large. They were clumsy. They were crooked. They were his. This man, who could build a room, who could sew a man's leg, had sat with his massive, scarred hands, and he had sewn her a dress, a white dress. "Elias," she whispered, her voice breaking. She pressed the soft cotton to her face. She wept, not from sadness, from a gratitude so profound it was a pain in her chest. It is not as fine as the green one," he mumbled, looking at the floor. She ran to him. She threw her arms around his neck, burying her face against his chest. "It is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen." When they rode down to the Miller homestead, Clara felt like a queen. The white dress was simple, but it was hers. Elias rode beside her, and he was not the mountain man, the killer, the legend. He was her husband. The wedding was in the open air, the reception a dance in the Miller's big, clean barn. The homestead was full of people, and Clara's fear returned. She saw them. Mrs. Hatcher was there, and Mr. Hatcher, and Silas, the trapper. His eyes, when they found hers, were filled with a dull, simmering hatred. Clara's hand instinctively went to Elias's arm. He covered her hand with his. "It is all right," he murmured. "I am here." Some of the women mocked her. She heard the whispers as she passed. "That's her, the useless one. Look at her, in that flour sack, thinks she's a bride." Clara flinched, and her face burned. But something else was happening. Mrs. Hatcher was watching her, but not with scorn. It was curiosity. And Mr. Hatcher came over, his hand outstretched to Elias. "Boone, glad you came. And Mistress Boone." He nodded to Clara, his eyes kind. "That was a fine thing you did. At the trading post, we do not hold with men like Silas. You are welcome here." At the dance, Elias did not dance. He stood by the wall, a pillar of a man, his arms crossed. He just watched her. He was not just watching her. He was watching, making sure she was safe. A young man, brave and flushed with drink, asked Clara to dance. She looked at Elias, he nodded, and so she danced. And the townsfolk, the ones who had mocked her, went quiet. They were impressed, not by her, by him, by the way the terrifying Elias Boone watched his wife. His eyes were not cold, they were not hard, they were steady, and they were, in a way that made every woman in the room hold her breath, filled with a quiet, bottomless pride. He was, in his silence, telling the whole world, this one is mine. The tragedy, when it came, was a sound, a low, tearing roar, like 1,000 trees falling at once. It was not thunder, it was water. "The dam," a man screamed, pointing up the mountain. "The dam on Coulter Lake! It's broke!" The Miller homestead was in the low valley. The wall of water, a churning, muddy, log-filled monster, was coming. It was chaos. People screamed. They ran for high ground. Wagons were overturned. Elias did not run. He grabbed Clara. "High ground. Now." He pushed her toward the small hill behind the barn. "Go!" "Elias, where are you going?" she shrieked, panicked. He was already running, not away from the water, but toward the wash, where the flood was at its worst. A wagon, the one belonging to the preacher, was stuck, and in the back. "Help!" a voice screamed. "My baby!" It was the preacher's wife, a young woman, and her mother. An older woman Clara recognized from the trading post. Their wagon was tipping. the water already up to the bed. The old woman was holding a swaddled infant. Elias was a force. He did not hesitate. He plunged into the churning, icy water. It was up to his chest. A log, the size of a man, slammed into his side. He roared, but he did not fall. He reached the wagon. "Give me the child," he yelled. The young mother, crying, handed him the baby. Elias tucked the infant inside his own thick coat, a small, precious bundle against his chest. "Now, you," he said to the mother, "hold on. Do not let go." He got the young woman on his back. "Now you, grandmother." "There is no time," the old woman shrieked. "Save them!" "I am not leaving you," Elias bellowed, his voice a command of God. He grabbed the old woman's arm with a grip of steel and pulled. He fought the current. He was a mountain, moving against a river. He was all strength, all will. He got the three of them, the baby, the mother, the grandmother, to the high ground, and collapsed, coughing, the baby still held safe and dry against his heart. Clara, who had been watching, her heart in her throat, did not stay on the hill. She saw the devastation. She saw the people, cold, wet, and in shock. The girl who had been useless. The girl who could not cook, who could not sew, who had been sold and locked in a cellar, was gone. In her place was Clara Boone. She ran to the barn, which was on higher ground. "Mr. Miller!" she shouted, her voice ringing with an authority she did not know she possessed. "The blankets!" "We need all of them, and the whiskey, and Mrs. Hatcher, you, help me. We need to build up the fire. We need coffee, hot coffee, now!" The townsfolk, in their panic, looked at her, and for the first time, they did not see a useless girl. They saw strength. They saw a leader, Mrs. Hatcher, her face pale, just nodded. "Yes, child, yes, you are right, for the rest of the day." Clara organized. She tore the white wedding dress Elias had made her into strips. She bandaged a man's broken arm. She served hot coffee to the shivering. She held the very baby Elias had saved, rocking it, while its mother wept in gratitude. She was in the middle of the disaster, a point of calm, fierce strength. The townsfolk, who had seen her as a burden, now saw her as a blessing. The flood receded, leaving mud and ruin. The town was hurt, but no one had died. Because of Elias, because of Clara. It was only at dusk, when the last of the displaced were settled, that Clara went to find her husband. He was sitting by the ruined wagon, alone. He was in pain. "Elias," she said, her voice soft. He looked up. His face was pale. The log," he said, his hand on his side. It hit hard." She helped him up. He was injured. That log had done more than bruise him. She got him on his horse, and she led him home, back up the mountain, away from the town that now, finally, respected them. She nursed him. It was 2 broken ribs and a gash on his side that needed stitching. The roles were reversed again. He was the patient, she was the healer. "Your stitches are better," he grumbled, as she pulled the thread tight. "I have had practice. Husband," she said, her voice gentle. That night, he was propped up in bed, his chest bound. She sat beside him, holding his hand. "The baby," she said quietly. When you pulled it from the water, you looked—" "I know," he said, his voice thick. "Elias," she said, her heart full. "Maybe, someday, when you are healed, maybe the town, maybe there is an orphan from all this, or maybe—" She looked at the new room, visible through the doorway. "Maybe," he said. He squeezed her hand. "A child, here, with you." She looked at him. This man who had saved her. This man who had saved a town. This man who had built her a room for someday. "I am not afraid anymore," she whispered. "Not of Missouri, not of the town, not of anything." She leaned her head against his good shoulder. "I want to stay here," she said, the words a final, perfect vow. "With you, forever." The next night, he was better. His ribs were a deep, purple ache, But he was a mountain man. He was standing outside, under the stars, which were so bright they looked like holes punched in the sky. He was carving. She came outside, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "What are you doing?" He was at the big aspen tree at the edge of the clearing. He was carving into the bark. She saw her initials, C.B., and his E.B. with a circle around them. "Elias," she breathed. It was beautiful. He turned to her. He took her hand. Not her right hand, her left. I am not a rich man," he said, his voice rough. "I do not have gold. I had the preacher at the wedding. I had him sign the paper. We are legal in the eyes of the law. Now." "I do not care about the law," she said. "I care about you." "I know," he said. "And I made this." He reached into his pocket. He pulled out a ring. It was not gold. It was not a diamond. It was a simple, thin band of dark, cured leather, and set in it, like a stone, was a small, hammered piece of silver. It was shiny, and it was beautiful. He slid it onto her finger. It was a perfect fit. Clara stared at it. The ring, the tree, the man. She was so full of a feeling she had no name for. She touched his scarred cheek. "I never knew," she whispered, her voice thick with tears. "I never knew a place like this. So quiet, so strong, so safe. I never knew a place like this could exist inside a man." Elias Boone looked at the woman he had married, the woman who had been called useless, and who had, in turn, saved him from his own ghosts. He covered her hand on his cheek, and he kissed her new ring. "It's yours now," he replied, his voice a low, final truth. "You made it real. Thank you for listening to this story. I truly hope it brought you some warmth. I would love to know where in the world you are listening from. So please, leave a comment and let me know. We are from Wild West, and we are so grateful to have you here. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to the channel. We would love to hear your thoughts, so share them in English in the comments below. We read every single one.